Hello, it's Simon Zutshi here. In this property education video, I'm going to share with you what I believe is the biggest lie in politics and what's the impact for you and your property investing. Well, the big lie is that both major political parties, so obviously the Labour Party, who are now the government, and the Conservatives, who are now the main opposition, they both say that we need 300,000 new homes every year to cope with the increasing demand for accommodation in the UK. And the reality is we are just not building enough homes. This is why there is a UK housing crisis right now. Now, I actually agree with the figure that's required, but both of these major parties said we're going to commit to get these properties built during our next parliamentary term. Now, obviously, just to be really clear, it's not the governments who actually build these properties. The job of the government is to create the environment suitable to stimulate house builders and developers to fulfill the requirement of 300,000 homes a year. Now, it's interesting that the Labour Party in their manifesto made it very clear, and Keir Starmer actually said, you know, we want 1.5 million new homes to help this UK housing crisis. Interestingly, in the Conservative manifesto, they said they wanted to build 1.6 million homes over the next 5 years. So how on earth is this going to happen? And the reality is, I'm telling you right now, it's just not going to happen. It's a complete lie. It's a fallacy. It's a myth. If you think we're going to get that many new houses, and let me tell you why it's not going to happen. The first problem is planning. Now, the Labour government have said that's one of the areas they really want to focus. They want to improve the planning process. We all know that planning takes an absolute age to get through, partly because some of the planning departments are understaffed and they don't have enough qualified people to really help the planning process go through. Maybe they're overwhelmed with the number of applications, but something definitely needs to happen. And the Labour government said they're going to resource planning departments to hopefully solve that problem. Hopefully they're going to get rid of some of the red tape as well and bring in more permitted development, which means things can move through quicker without having to get full planning permission. And also they talked about this grey zone as well. We obviously have brown fields, we have green fields, and we have grey fields, which is actually green belt that isn't actually very nice, and it doesn't really add much to the environment, and some of that is potentially going to be used. So planning is the first thing. Land has to be made available to be able to hit these high targets. Now, interestingly, Angela Raynar has recently said, well, actually, we want 370,000 new homes every year, which is even more of a fallacy and a lie. Now, I'd love it for it to happen, but it's just not going to be the case. The second point is, even if the planning wasn't an issue, we could go and build with these houses, who is going to actually build them? We do not have enough skilled labour in the UK to build all these properties. And there are a couple of reasons why. First of all, when Brexit came, many of the skilled Eastern European contractors were worried about what Brexit might mean, and many people left the country to go back to their home nations. Now, that is a real shame because that meant not just the property industry, but also hospitality industry. Lost a lot of really good, skilled staff who went back to Eastern Europe. So there aren't enough skilled staff. Also, the trend for many years in schools was to encourage as many pupils as possible to go through the school system and into university education. And that means they've not been pushing people down the route of becoming a skilled tradesperson. And so apprentices have not been really pushed very much. There are some apprentices, but not very many. And also, there aren't that many people who are actually prepared to train new apprentices. If you are a skilled contractor, a carpenter, electrician, etc., you can make a lot more money actually out doing the job because there's such a shortage rather than training people. So there's a real issue here. And the age of the building industry is increasing. So in other words, a lot of skilled people who at some point are going to retire, and we haven't got the new young blood coming up to replace those people. So lack of the right skilled people is a real challenge that's also going to prevent the government meeting this target of now 370,000 a year. And then finally, finance. Now, I know a little bit about this. I have a business called Crowd Property, and it's a specialist development funder. And, you know, the whole market has slowed down from legals to surveys. Everything just takes so long to arrange finance. And, you know, finance is not an easy thing to do. And so this is another obstacle that stops developers from developing. So all these problems compound, which means the biggest lie you've been told by both major political parties is we're going to build 1.5 or 1.6 million new homes over the next 5 years. It's just not going to happen. And think about this. Even if magically planning problems were resolved, which I hope they are, and let's say they bring on lots of apprentice schemes, it's going to take people years to train up to get them ready, and let's say financing improves. Let's say all those three major problems are improved. That's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years and years for those things to be solved and then start to come through with the right number of skilled tradespeople. So let's say the first year or two in a 5-year parliamentary term might just make, I don't know, a couple of 100,000 properties. Then that means there's a big shortfall that needs to be caught up. So it's not just getting to 300,000 a year or 370,000 a year. In the last few years, you're going to have to get to 450, 500,000 homes in the last couple of years to make up for the ones that weren't built in the first few years. This is why this is the biggest lie in politics. So what does this mean for you as a property investor? Well, the point is sometimes people make promises in their manifestos and sometimes they follow through, often they don't. But there are going to have to be some pretty major changes in policy to encourage developers to come and develop these buildings, and also in the planning departments as well. Now, one of the things the Labour Party talked about in their manifesto was that they wanted to encourage developers to provide more affordable housing. Affordable housing is ones where they're slightly lower spec, they're cheaper property, often sold to housing associations who help house people on lower incomes. And that's a great social thing to do, right? But the problem is, at any development, if a certain percentage is affordable housing that's sold for less money, it means the remaining properties either have to be sold for more money to make them profitable, to encourage the developer to do the development in the first place, which means actually the cost of housing goes up, which again kind of defeats the object, or it gets to the point where sites are just not feasible. So if the Labour government are not careful and they bring in too many restrictions about trying to force small developers to create all this affordable housing, suddenly developments just won't stack up anymore and developers will not be incentivised to build those properties. And that's the whole point of government, is to create the environment to stimulate the market. Also, if there are changes to taxes, and I believe the Labour Party before the election said we're not going to change taxes, and I think they've now looked at the things, oh, we need to change taxes. Well, what taxes are they going to change? Are they going to change capital gains tax, which is a tax that affects us as property investors? If we buy something, we hold it for a period of time, then sell it eventually. If we have to pay more tax on that, well, are people really going to want to develop and hold property? Maybe not. Also, income tax, corporation tax, which is a company tax, and most property investors and developers now do things within a company structure. If they massively increase the corporation tax, again, that's a disincentive for these developers to actually want to build property. So all of these things add up to suggest that the biggest lie in politics you're being told right now is that the government is going to help us build 370,000 properties a year. I would love it if that happened, but I can't see it happening in the next 5 years, certainly. If all the problems are changed, maybe the following 5 years, maybe production of manufacturing, building, developing of properties might get to 400,000 a year. It's never ever been that much, but if they solve all those problems, maybe that can happen. But we have to wait and see. So guys, you got to listen to what you're told. You've got to take opinions and decide what it means to you. I think this means that maybe it's good news for property investors. There's going to have to be some legislation, some changes to make it easier for us to develop. And developing property is not something that every investor should do. I believe if you want to invest in property, the first thing you need to do is bring cash flow in. And unfortunately, when you're doing bigger developments, they often don't give you cash flow. In fact, they swallow your cash flow. When you sell or refinance a development, that's when you get a bit of a big payday. But up until that point, they can use lots of cash. So property developing is something you should absolutely absolutely do at some time in your property journey, but probably not towards the beginning of the journey if you want cash flow from your property, which is what most property investors want. So whereas I don't think single let properties are a great strategy to start with, because at the moment, given interest rates being relatively high, you can't actually make most single lets stack up. Some parts of the country do, but mostly they don't. So strategies such as HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, and serviced accommodation are the higher cash flow strategies. As I record this training right now, my personal preference is HMOs. Now, there is an oversupply of HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. So you don't want to do an average HMO. You need to do a high-end co-living HMO, which looks better. It's a higher rent. You attract a slightly better type of tenant. You want to do that because there's not as much competition. There are a lot of very average HMOs in the market. In fact, I think there's an oversupply of average HMOs, so you don't want to do that. You must go co-living high-end. And as far as serviced accommodation, I think it's a fantastic strategy. It's where you have a short-term stay, Airbnb, corporate lets, that kind of thing. You get a much higher rental income. But obviously, at the moment, there is a massive oversupply of this as well. A lot of operators are seeing lower occupancy rates. They're seeing lower nightly rentals as well. Now, regulation is coming to the world of SA, and I think that will get a lot of the amateurs to leave the market. So I think SA will be a really good strategy when there's less supply, still good demand, thus prices will go back up again. But I think right now, for the moment, my money is on HMOs, which is a far more stable, predictable income than short-term serviced accommodation. That's just my personal view. I'd love your view though. Why not comment below, which do you think is the best cash generating strategy? Is it HMOs or is it serviced accommodation? I'd love you to comment below and let me see what you believe, and maybe we have a bit of a debate about that. But also, if you like this video, please like it, please subscribe to the channel, and make sure you hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified anytime a new video comes out, especially when it's topical like this. I want to make sure you get the latest information as soon as it comes out. So as ever, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. I hope you enjoy the next video.